posted for discussion only, and no action can or will be taken. Councilmember Holland is out of state and won't be with us this evening. We have one item on our agenda, and that's the Performing Arts Center market study. I just add that I'm over here because I have a cold, so
because we don't like him.
The council will survive as a result if I stay here.
The first time you've been isolated.
Yeah. But I would like to just say on this, I'd like if we could present it, Jim, you present, and then I'd like council, this is a very controversial subject, we all have opinions, let's just ask questions as they come up, and just don't hesitate to do that. Once you complete your presentation, I'm going to open up to the public for any comments from the public, and then we'll go around the table again. Okay? Okay, Jim, you're up.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Wanted to introduce to you Mr. Bob Bailey. He's the Vice President of AMS Planning and Research. He is here to present to you the findings of a market study that staff commissioned with his firm last year. The purpose of this study was to look at the market for a performing arts center here in Goodyear and provide recommendations on what this community could support both now and in the long term. Mr. Bailey will be going through those findings, his report, as well as his recommendations. So I'll introduce Bob Bailey.
Good evening, Council. It's good to see you again after the New Year. Happy New Year. Belated Happy New Year to you all. Maybe Chinese New Year. What I'd like to do is, as the Mayor said, we can go through this in a dialogue way. I've got about 20 slides. This is accompanied by a report that was provided, and I think you have copies of the detailed report. I'm sure if you have insomnia, it makes great reading. So I'll refer to that report as we go through the presentation, and welcome your questions and comments, and we'll try to get through it in how long, Mr. Mayor, do we have? Would we like to take? Actually,
within the hour. We can go over it. The next meeting does not start until this one terminates, so.
Okay.
You can go under also,
though. I'll do my best to stick to the schedule.
As you get started, maybe you could pull the microphone in just a little bit. I think there's some folks maybe in the back of the room that might not be able to hear you.
How's that? Let's see. Are we going to get... So what I'd like to do is, it's rather simple. I want to review the scope of work with you, what we set out to do, then talk to you a little bit about what we found out and how we found it out, and then just the last slide sort of talks a little bit about our recommendations and findings from the research. Keep myself on track with my own notes here. What we really were asked to do was to look at what we called the local and regional markets, and the first question of that, of course, is how do you define local and how do you define regional, so that we had a lot of discussions about what the differences are and how they overlap and so on. And to make some recommendations with regard to facilities which would address these markets, or market, as it may turn out, and then we have evaluated or made some comments on the proposed site and location of it. I think the question that is on all lay people's minds as we talk about these performing arts projects is the famous if we build it, will they come? And I'm afraid that that's a very simple question with a very complex set of answers to it, and I'm going to do my best to work through it with you. We started off with conducting a series of interviews with stakeholders and key people in the arts, in the business sector, educators, arts administrators, patrons throughout the county, actually, concentrating, of course, in the West Valley, but reached as far out as Mesa and Scottsdale and North Phoenix and so on. And the interviews, as you council members will recall, were quite broad-ranging in terms of the arts and the community and how they relate to each other and what does it all mean in terms of facilities and programming and so on. There's always a risk in these key informed interviews of telling you what you already know, but I think what's important is it's filtered through the eyes of our experience in planning performing arts facilities throughout the U.S. so that we we may be saying some things that you already know, but I think the filter and the context that we provide for you is sort of about the performing arts and what we know. So really the first questions were really about the vision for the city, and I have to say that there is a very strong sense that we got about Goodyear as the regional destination for the West Valley. And that was interesting for us to hear, because I think it's a very strong vision, and it was reinforced by conversations outside of Goodyear, which sort of said, well, of course, it has that potential to be the regional destination. And indeed, the geography is obvious almost, as we'll look at some maps later on, that it has that potential and the vision is here. I think the second sort of finding for us was that the vision is one which incorporates a wide range of commercial, non-commercial, and civic activities. And I think that you as council members and your staff recognize the relationship among what is known as perhaps the three stools of, or the three legs of the stool of community development, which is really retail, residential, and civic or community. And I think the link between those three is very important, and it's recognized here. And of course, arts and culture and the performing arts fit right in that community vision. So, and that's, I have to say, in my experience, which is quite long in this field, that is not a universal truth in cities that we work in.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
I know Julie is here. Years ago, West Valley Arts tried to get a performing arts program going, and it failed. Failed miserably. How can you guarantee that this is going to be a failure with that background in the community?
A failure or a success?
What?
I'm sorry.
Failure.
I think you meant.
West Valley Arts.
I'm not sure I understood the question, sir.
There was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dick, you're getting at the fact that they did a lot of fundraising to try and build a facility, and it didn't necessarily.
building the facility.
Didn't necessarily get off the ground. That's what you're referring to.
right.
right?
Yeah. If I could, may I put that in the parking lot for a few minutes, and I will come back to it, because it's certainly something that we addressed in our research, and I want to make sure that we do touch on that. So remind me if I forget, please. The next set of discussions were really, as we asked to sort of review the site for this project, and the city center being the proposed site, and its relationship to, I think, two other major projects in the community with the regional mall and the spring training recreational center. I think our sense is that those are all projects, the three of which will work and need to work together. I think one of the questions in the performing arts business is always what we call critical mass, or trying to generate the revenue, broad-based sets of revenue out of our performing arts facilities so that they do interlink with retail and residential and commercial development. And so that the distance between city center and the regional mall and the ballpark were of concern that was brought up to us, and I think it is a concern that as planning, if planning goes forward with this, it's going to really call for a branding and a strong connection among those three and other major developments. Another concern of the city center that was brought up to us, and we reflect, is the uncertainty of the plans for Sun MP properties on the other three corners of Estrella and Yuma, and the importance that those will have in the success of any kind of a performing arts project. That is something that we will come back to in our suggestions and recommendations to you. And then another concern that was brought up is, and I think this is a double-edged sword, is the density and the mix of uses on the site, which I think is, as I said, critical mass and scale and image are very important. And I think one of the things the city center site can do is to create that sort of critical mass in terms of that as a site that is going to be about all of those mixed uses. Concern expressed by some is about the traffic and congestion that this kind of concentration can be, and I think I'm relating to you what we have heard in the community as we conducted the interviews. Perhaps addressing your question in terms of arts and culture in the West Valley, I think there's two parts to this, or maybe three. One is that the arts attenders, insofar as we obtain anecdotal evidence from our interviews, there is and I use the word bemoan, there is a great concern about the travel. And as we look at this market area and the supply of product in this market area, there's great concern that we heard about the need to travel long times to get to quality performing arts events, large-scale performing arts events. The second part of the question really is about the providers or the arts community. And as you'll see when we talk about the organizational survey that we conducted, the West Valley arts scene is really one that's in the early stages of evolving, as you know. And how much of this is facility-driven is always a question. But there is a small number of arts organizations in the West Valley who are on a path of growth. It's certainly not of the scale and scope of Phoenix or the East Valley. And so that's a critical aspect of, I think, of our considerations in this Performing Arts Center. And the third point there is talking about the educational institutions, and we met with both of the universities and the community college and the school district, and talked a great deal about their role in this performing arts facilities question. And as you probably know, cities such as Gilbert or Wickenburg and Prescott have joined with their school districts or their colleges to create facilities which are joint use, shared use community facilities. I think what was interesting to us in this marketplace is that we did not hear that from your educational providers. That they are, this year's, your high school district is essentially built 3 venues, which are very much for school use, although they are used to a degree by the community, but their intent really was a school use intent, unlike, say, Chandler, which was built as a joint use venue. Neither of the universities, as you know, are planning performance venues, and the community college is indeed planning, or I guess planning is the right word, a performance venue, which they see as their venue. They don't see it as a...
Who is this?
A community college. They don't see it as a joint-use community venue in our discussions with them. So that's kind of an unusual finding for us, particularly in Arizona, where there are so many joint-use, shared-use venues to go up and down the state, from universities through colleges through school districts. There are a lot of joint-use, shared-use venues, and developed with the joint and shared use from the outset. One of the most recent being Wickenburg. The last point there is sort of that functional over iconic. That was very gratifying to us as really management consultants and business planners. We do hear in our work in communities seeking icons, seeking grand architecture, seeking big statements. And I won't mention any names in Maricopa County, but there are some who have done this, and they're very, very expensive venues and expensive to operate. So I think your community was telling us, hey, make it work. We don't need another palace. And that was very gratifying to us, and I think should be to you, too.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I found it a little different on that third bullet under arts and culture, and I'll tell you why. And, of course, how do you define major, so maybe that's our difference. But first off, Australia Mountain Community College at least did have a joint use agreement with West Valley Fine Arts Council. So I think they're very willing to joint use. It just wasn't with us. And it was with an earlier collaboration with the Arts Council. I don't know the status of that, and that's probably not important to this discussion. There's 2 high schools, and particularly, well, the Desert Edge has performing arts. I don't know how large it is. But in the Estrellas, we have a high school with a 600-seat performing arts center, relatively state-of-the-art, good acoustics. Obviously, they expect to be a major user of it, or they wouldn't spend the taxpayers' dollars to build it. And then the educational institutions, my contact with them would indicate, both of them, that they wanted a performing arts studio of some large size. They made that pretty clear to me, in fact. They never said, we'll help pay for it, but I think there was an assumption they would. But in the early part of March, we're going to there's 37 private fine arts colleges in the country, and one of those is going to visit us the early part of March with the express purpose of seeing the president of that college if they should come to Goodyear, and certainly he wants to. So there is significant interest by educational institutions in a performing arts studio, performing arts center. Okay.
Mayor, did they say they want to pay for it, or they want to help pay for it, or they feel like we need to offer it to get them here, or what?
Well, they aren't going to say that yet, but certainly for them to use, depends on, is this a public-private partnership? Is this government-funded? We aren't there yet. Yeah. But if it were public-funded, then anybody that uses it, other than that public, would be expected to pay for it. Now, a public-private partnership would be much more interesting because then they'd be part of the capital investment as well.
I'm thinking capital.
Yeah, but it's way too early to know that answer yet. But certainly those who use have to pay, one way or another.
Planning landscapes are always constantly changing, and leadership changes, financial situations change, markets change. Our snapshot of the market was based on the interviews with the school district, the college district, and the leadership of the universities. And we did indeed hear a high level of interest in this project. What we did not hear, as I said, was that they were unilaterally or bilaterally or multilaterally willing to lead the development of a performing arts project, which would be a community use project. What we did hear, indeed, and you're right, Mr. Mayor, is there's a high level of interest in this. Now, whether they will pay is not the question we were asking. This was a market study. So I think that your points about the high school district, Stray Mountain College, are good ones, because I think they will be important factors in the development of the community. I don't see them as developers of a facility, nor do they, insofar as we heard. The high school theaters are, shall I say, I think they're state-of-the-art for high school performing arts facilities. And this is a great thing. And they use them well, and the community uses them. What they're not is facilities which are readily accessible, affordable, and functional for the level of performing arts activity that we were exploring. They do serve very well for community groups. What they don't do is they don't serve for professional performing arts.
If I may, on that point, I'd like to inject something here. The fact remains that the community really wants to function as its own, and they don't want to really work with the schools. In the first place, you can't. School drama departments and school music departments will tie up their auditoriums until no one else can use them. And rightly so, they have programs that they use all year long. But I don't think we're at the point of talking about financing a project we don't know anything about yet, number one. But the capital financing of a performing arts center, I don't think is going to be as difficult as people think it is. And it won't take that much taxpayers' money if we get creative and get out there and find the grants that will help us to build it. If you share in this, you'll find that the money is out there. There is money available. I've talked to several agencies that have stated that there's money going unused even in some of these things. But I don't think we're at that point yet. We have to determine if it's feasible for a performing arts center, what kind of performing arts center. And the thing I don't see in this study is anything about the economic impact of the performing arts to our community. And that part, I think, is a very important missing block that we need to find some answers for, because, yes, number one, children, the education in the arts, and adults continuing education in the arts But on the other side, there is that enhancement of what it will bring to our community in economic gain. And that's important, because I know of several cities where the economic gain is tremendous. And I know it costs that city some money, $1 million or $2 million, to do the O&M on them, but the economic impact to that community, and a couple of communities that I know of, is well over $60 million. Much more than what the baseball stadium can give to the community. And the baseball stadium, we're planning on having that as also a positive economic impact. But this is year-round, where your stadium isn't, as far as money coming into the coffers. Anyway, I'm just a little disappointed that it didn't, and maybe this has to be further research to get
Well,
that economic
I think, Frank, just for clarity, that is not the purpose of this study.
Well, I thought it was supposed to be included in this study.
We did not contract for that.
It's interesting.
I have a
Clarification,
question.
please.
Did you speak with Franklin Pierce and Incarnate Word? Did you talk?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
We spent,
And
yeah.
their response?
They are, as the mayor said, they're highly interested in this venue. They don't see themselves as primary users, or this venue. I'll just back up from that a bit. But highly interested in a performing arts venue. Do not see themselves as significant users of a performing arts venue that's not not integrated in their campus as a lecture hall. That was quite clear to me. And we did hear at the same time in our conversations about future college interests that were not defined to us. So there may be some future interests.
And you weren't aware of the one, I agree. But I had to make a little talk. In fact, Julie asked me to do it to a group downtown. So I studied those two schools. And both of them have performing arts in their curriculum as degree programs. And one has certainly Bachelor of Fine Arts. The new school has a Master of Fine Arts. And they want to carry that to Goodyear, that type of curriculum. But they aren't going to carry it up front. It's going to be later. But they are going to have a significant interest in the performing arts.
I wanted a clarification of your response to.
My response to Frank was
That's
that
right.
this study was not to address the economics of the Performing Arts Center. It was to determine whether or not there was a market for the Performing Arts Center in the Goodyear area and the surrounding area, and that excludes the economics.
I can clarify.
So it does not, the sustainability is not connected at all.
But we did not look at the finances in any way. This is simply and strictly a market.
Me for a second, because we're going to go through we're only 4 slides into this, and we're bombing a bunch of questions at you, and you need to get through your presentation. But with all due respect to that, help me understand, how do you define a market? I obviously have looked ahead a little bit, and you've got some demographics. So you're going to show us some demographic market data, which I know you probably start on your next slide, but help me understand how that translates into then making a decision into perhaps furthering something in a capital improvement program without knowing what my gate chart is.
If I may just go,
and then I'm going to be asking you
thanks,
that
Rob.
at
Yeah,
slide 20.
okay,
So
it is very much in my mind, and indeed is the bottom line question, as you well identified, is what is the relationship between a capital project and the market? And I think that's a fundamental question that we were asked to address, and hopefully we can make some progress on giving you some answers. Let me start by sort of talking about the performing arts and the market for the performing arts, and the relationship between market population or market area and a performing arts facility. Essentially, we talk what is known as a regional performing arts facility, such as you have in Mesa or downtown Phoenix or arguably in Scottsdale. In our experience, roughly a 20-mile, 30-minute drive time is what we would call a trade area for that large regional venue. Now, you know, I know that this is product driven. You know, if I happen to be a Bruce Coburn fan and I live in Wickenburg and he's playing in Mesa, I'm going to drive to Mesa. But that's not what the purpose of that venue market, or that's not really what that primary market is for that venue. I think we all are very aware of sort of the product-driven aspects of this market. The second market that we know in our business is what we call roughly, we call it a primary market, or in this case a 5-mile, and typically 5-mile radius for what we would call a local serving performance venue. Typically less than 1,000 seats, you know, and this can be all over the map, but typically you're talking theaters in the 500, 600, 700 seat range. And as we looked at the plans and ideas and concepts around what has been discussed in Goodyear, and indeed both, quote, local serving and, quote, region serving venues were on the list. Out of our interviews, we had a number of people say, gee, we need to serve our local, our West Valley local arts organizations and our Goodyear residents. Other people said, and it's not an either or, we want to create, as I said, a destination for a larger market area for the West Valley, for the greater West Valley. So our attempt here is to really define those two local markets based on the context of our experience and the conversations that we had with staff and leadership and people in the community. And we defined what we call, and wording gets a little awkward here, what we call primary market, which would be the local serving market, as essentially the 3 cities of Goodyear, Litchfield Park, Avondale, or 4 cities in Tolleson, which is about 150,000 people today. And this larger, what we call trade area or regional market, the 30-mile drive west of the I-17 corridor, which really characterizes this west side market, if you will, which includes Sun Cities and El Mirage and Surprise, Buckeye, West Phoenix, and so on and so forth. This sort of artificial subdivision, if you will, we felt was pretty much confirmed in our leadership interviews, and so we chose this as our sort of our basic structures to begin to look at the market potential for this performing arts project or projects. Again, within the caveat of people will travel to the end of the world to see their favorite artist, and we really want to make sure that that is understood, is that if you have a product, then people will come. It's who will take the risk to present that product. So what do these two market areas look like? A lot of this is not news to you. You know that you have a market in Goodyear which is young, family, that in the greater Arizona state and greater Maricopa area, it's an older demographic than you have. You are more wealthy in terms of your household income. You have 38% of the residents of Goodyear, this is 2008 data, who have household incomes of over $75,000, whereas in the greater trade area, it's only 25%. So we know that education and income are primary drivers for arts consumption. And you can picture it, education is kind of an indicator of whether you attend the arts and what your level of interests are, and these are very gross estimates. And income is a question of how frequently, how much can you afford to attend the arts. So the two work very much hand in hand with many other factors, which I'll talk about in a minute about consumer profiling and family size and capital assets and so on. From the basic demographics, it's a positive market for the arts. And thanks, Jim. Trying to keep my notes in front of me here. Forgive me.
Before you go any further on that, in your marketing definition, do you have any interest from Avondale and Tolleson and Allison in this study? Individual?
I'm not sure of your question. The question that we were asking was, where are the potential audiences for
Well, that's what I'm
the
asking.
program?
That's
We
what
have
I'm
no
asking.
we have no primary evidence of interest. What we do have is a secondary population analysis, and which says that there is a likelihood of attendance. Whether they will or they won't, we don't know, and essentially won't know until after we start. But this is really about likelihood of attendance. The question in a market study is, look at this population. What do we know, and I'll get to this in a minute, about this population and its propensity or its potential interest in attending the live performing arts? And our demographic indicators at the outset are strong. The simple age, education, family characteristics, and as we look in more depth at the consumer profile, you'll see that it's a stronger consumer profile than average.
The reason I asked the question is that I would like to find out what the potential would be from those two communities to participate in this program.
If the question is about financial participation, this was not something we were asked to address.
Talking about marketing definition, and you've included four cities, so there must be some reason for including all of them.
I think it's population, isn't it?
It's a population.
Yeah, no.
Participation.
So hopefully if they're interested in participating, the next step is ask them whether they're interested in participating financially. I think this is certainly a step that can go ahead. And we know the population growth figures are amazing. The current economic and fiscal situation is impacting this, but I think we all know that by 2030 we'll be looking at numbers that are pretty amazing growth, particularly as we move further west in the valley. It's very difficult to make these projections. We've drawn on the Maricopa Association of Governments for these projections, which are a couple of years old or a year or so old, so they have to be tempered in terms of what we know today. The bottom line question really here in terms of simple population numbers and characteristics of demographics, the local market population is adequate to support a local serving facility. The regional population is adequate to serve a regional facility. Now, this is not saying anything about supply of product, competition, financing, and all of the factors that need to go in. But our question was really a market question. And as we began to look in more depth at the consumer profile of this market, which brings in additional information to the demographics. And this is, if you have, I think the city has probably undergone a series of market studies over the years, and you'll see these labels are drawn from, thank you, Jim. Why don't you run this one for me? Keep me on track.
Well, I would add to just to clarify that the 400 and some thousand does not include Buckeye. And one may argue that it shouldn't include all of Buckeye, but I think it's definitely the eastern part of Buckeye should be included, the Verado, Sundance area, and that by doing that, you would probably add, by 2030, 100,000 of that number.
I think that this is certainly a point of discussion, and in terms of the gross numbers that we're looking at, as I say, that even excluding that eastern part of Buckeye, the numbers are adequate. Jim has reminded me to keep moving here, but the consumer profile really reinforces the demographic data, and it boils down really to a market potential measure. And here it's described in detail in our report. This is based on a national database of arts consumers, and it's a consumer profile based on existing arts attendees in the United States, and it's laid over on the consumer profile of our market areas. And it's an indication of the likelihood of residents to attend. It's not whether they will or they won't. This is a measure, again, of propensity to attend. And you see our averages are all above the national average of 100 here, 8% above national average to for likelihood of attending a live theater performance. So essentially, our analysis based on the demographics and the consumer profile is that we do have very strong markets. Questions are, what is the competitive situation, and how does this factor into the size of venue or the trade area that you choose to serve or the trade areas you choose to serve? Next thing we did was begin to look at the competitive landscape in this area, in these 20 to 30 mile, and we went out as far as, you see, 44 miles to the Chandler Center for the Arts. These are venues in this marketplace which are serving the live performing arts, concerts, classical music, dance, opera, as well as the commercial touring artists. These are primarily owned by local governments, as you see, or combinations, in some cases of Chandler, jointly owned with the school district and the city of Chandler. They were, with two exceptions rather, operated by not-for-profit or civic governments, Dodge and Celebrity both being commercial undertakings. A couple of them are operated under contract to nonprofit organizations. So we have the whole range in this county, really, of what is the national landscape of how performing arts centers are operated, from the commercial operators with the commercial concerts down to the independent nonprofit organization.
Did you review Mesa as well?
Absolutely, yes. It's the second from the bottom on this list, in the 1,500-seat theater.
I beg your pardon.
Are these competitive to a regional venue in the West Valley? As you see, the closest one, Sundome, with the exception of the Cricket, is closed. If you get to downtown Phoenix, you're at the 22-mile radius. Well, there's a map of how these radiuses at 20 miles look. And you see Goodyear is overlapped, or this Goodyear market west of the 17 corridor is overlapped by a number of these venues. What these circles really represent is the center of each of those venues that was on that list in the previous slide. And if you draw a 20-mile radius outside that, you see that Goodyear is served by about 3 of them, one of those being the Cricket Pavilion, which is providing product and entertainment, which is quite different from what would be envisioned at a performing arts center in Goodyear. So in terms of the large venues, we have a landscape which says, gosh, you just sort of, you squint your eyes and you look at the red dots and you just extend that red dot to the left there, you see an underserved market in terms of competitive venues. The next set we looked at was what they call the small or local serving, or the mid-size, or however we want to describe them. But essentially they're under 1,000 seats, more typically around 500, 600 seats, some of them as small as 200 or 300 seats. And this is for this market, quite a short list. And we've stretched out to 51 miles to Wickenburg, the New Del Webb Center, to do this analysis. And these are, again, primarily servicing community organizations, although there's lots of exceptions, Scottsdale being one. We do a lot of touring, professional events. Again, all but one is owned by local government. 2 are actually, Tempe and Mesa are both run by local governments. One is an independent nonprofit, the Pebble Creek, and the majority of these are operated by nonprofit organizations under contract to the owners. Scottsdale being an example, and arguably Phoenix Theater, example. Mapping these in a little different way, you see those venues identified on a map of the greater market area, stretching out to, as far as I said, Wickenburg, 51 miles away, and over to Mesa, which I think was 30-some-odd miles away. Again, we see this as an underserved market. Pebble Creek, as you are aware, has limited accessibility to the general public and is located in the gated community. So, is it a local serving venue? Absolutely. Is it generally available to the vast array of arts organizations in the community? Limited, we would say. So the competitive landscape is an interesting one, and again points to positive market. The next thing we looked at was thanks, Jim. Based on this market, based on our interviews, based on discussions with some of city staff, we said, well, let's look how some other cities have addressed this question. Edge cities or suburban cities that combine civic and cultural functions with city halls or retail or residential. These are municipal local government venues, and they are on the edge of major markets. And we winnowed a list down to essentially 4, and there's 2 types in these 4. There's the large venues at Thousand Oaks and California Center for the Arts, and the smaller mid-sized venues at Mountain View and Rancho Cucamonga. And I just want to talk about them for a minute because I think they offer some good lessons for our market research, our market analysis. Here are some details on them. These are in marketplaces which are not significantly different from the marketplace here. Escondido is about 250,000 people in its local market, about 1.3 million in its greater market. Thousand Oaks is about 150,000 in its local market, 1.2 in its greater market. Rancho Cucamonga is about 275,000 and 2.5 million. So you see that these markets are pretty much the same. Escondido is some 40 miles from 35 odd miles from San Diego, and the details of each of these is in the report which you have received. You see they're all basically they offer a mix of venues of a large and a small, or a mid-size and a very small. But let's look at some of them in pairs here. The Escondido and Thousand Oaks are both.
Excuse me, could I ask one question?
Yes, Jim.
Are those dollars in today's dollars?
No.
That's
not.
what they spent.
That's what they spent.
1994, $85 million.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so 1991, 42 million, 1994, 64.
Yes.
That's what they spent then. Wow. It would be interesting to know what today's dollars would. But you considered Mountain View an edge suburban city? Explain that, because I can
Good
get there by
question,
light
Rob.
rail, Caltrans, or bus.
Good
So
question.
tell me how you consider that an edge city. Challenge your assumption.
Think for a minute. Okay.
I stumped you, but it just dawned, as I'm sitting there listening.
If it walks like, looks like, acts like, is it? Mountain View, and I know it well, we actually have consulted with them over the years. It is indeed in a very complex marketplace in Silicon Valley of a couple million people or more. There is no there in Silicon Valley, despite San Jose's claims. So that it is a mix, it is a mass of sort of these edge city, Cupertino, Mountain View, Milpitas, and we can go on, Sunnyvale, and so on. These are cities which I hope we don't replicate here in terms of sort of that messy landscape they have, but Mountain View represented to us, an example of an interesting project because it is a combined city hall theater project on a main drag, which was before, without dragging on the details here, before that center was built, you could shoot a cannon down Castro Street, which is Main Street, Mountain View, at any time of the day or night, and you wouldn't hit anybody. Today, if you went to Castro Street in Mountain View, it's hopping. And so we sort of looked at that from that example of
You're comparing it to
suburban.
1991 at the time, perhaps.
91, yeah, whenever it was.
Today.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Bob, these populations of these 4 cities at the times that they were built, were they comparable to our city?
Oh, there's a good question. I'm thinking, it's a very dynamic situation. In general, we're in that 150 to 250,
150 to
250
population?
local population
Or local population?
in the market area.
In that market area.
Market area, okay. And today, are these 4 performing arts centers shall we say, in the red or in the black?
Well, they're all in the red in terms of what their bottom operating and earned
Are
revenue
they-
balance is.
Concerns of being closed down, let's put it that way. When you
No.
compare them, no.
No.
Thank you.
Let me come
That's
back to
fine.
this question in some specifics as we look at some of the specifics. I think that in these large venues, Escondido is looked on as being challenged. Thousand Oaks is looked on as being a tremendous success.
Okay.
What's the difference? Very complex. Elaborate building, $85 million in what year was that? Signature architect, iconic architecture, a campus of buildings which all have roofs and walls and security issues. So you have many, but it is beautiful.
It was a Mercedes.
And it is in some respects very successful. But they have had difficulty meeting their budget every year. There are management issues and so on. Thousand Oaks, on the other hand, is a venue which is part of their city hall complex. It's a very tight freeway window. If you've driven by it, you know the Fly Tower is right in your face as you go up Highway 101, and is in a market which is not too dissimilar from this market here. It's just outside the San Fernando Valley. And it is indeed considered a success. Now, they all have operating subsidies or operating support from their city at various levels, Escondido being higher on a percentage basis and an absolute basis than Thousand Oaks, for example. But that's a very complex set of discussions.
Does the resident companies, is that what seems to sustain Thousand Oaks, say more than Escondido? I see that
Yes.
Escondido does not have a resident company.
I think that is a success benchmark for, I would say the Thousand Oaks, it's more than resident companies. It's an active participation of the private sector leadership and the Friends of the Arts in their operations and financial support, which Escondido has not been able to accomplish. One of the interesting aspects, and we'll come back to it, is the joint use of their city council chambers at Thousand Oaks as a performing arts venue. Mondays and Tuesdays, it's council and planning. Tuesdays through Sunday, it's performing arts, and it's quite an amazing success for them. It's about 400 and some seats, as I recall. We looked at these two mid-sized venues, and Rob has mentioned Mountain View. Ranch Cucamonga opened a couple of years ago as part of a regional lifestyle mall. It's a 500-seat youth-oriented family theater. What is interesting there is the city of Rancho Cucamonga attempted bravely to find, quote, resident companies or to find nonprofits to come and operate and program and manage. Indeed, they ended up doing it themselves and have been quite successful in setting up a youth theater company and a presenting program, and have been very successful at this venue, and is one they're very proud of and I think have every right to be. Similarly, Mountain View started with no resident company and for a few years struggled, and then founded an organization called TheaterWorks, a professional Lord D theater company that is their core occupant now, and they also are used by community groups. So it's a lesson kind of in securing leadership from the private sector, if you will, in the nonprofit sector. All four of these are successful in many ways, and all four are challenged in many ways, as we all are in today's market. So the third step of our research was really trying to address the needs of arts organizations in the West Valley. And I will speed up here, Jim, thanks. Quickly, we identified a long list of 100-plus organizations, which we worked to reduce to 48 organizations as prospective candidates. We had some 16 respond to this survey, including 8 from within this primary market, Goodyear primary market, 9 from the greater West Valley, particularly in the north end, and the balance being kind of Phoenix-based or East Valley-based. What was interesting out of this survey was among this mix of professional, community, theater, music, dance organizations. A number of organizations outside this primary market area, in particular we point to the Phoenix Symphony or Child's Play Theater, have a great deal of interest in this market and in performing run-out and extension performances in a venue here. Two of these were interested in a large venue, West Valley Symphony and the Phoenix Symphony. The vast majority interested in a smaller venue, anywhere between 200 and 500 seats. Again, interestingly, that last bullet there, Chevy, not Cadillac, which I think is really an expression of the sincerity of interest of these organizations and having something which is really functional and works for them rather than an architectural icon. Looking at the details of this, our analysis, which is very kind of a preliminary gross analysis, we found that the demand kind of breaks down into sort of three areas of a very small theater of roughly 200 seats, 175, 200 seats, a mid-sized theater of 400 or 500 seats, and a large theater. And this is, again, looking at local users of 1,400 to 2,000 seats. Very preliminary numbers. Indeed, if this project were to go forward, there's a lot of discussion about how that would play out. And there's a lot of flexibility in this. Child's Play, for example, said to us, well, we would really like to have 350 seats if we were to come here and perform, but if it's 200, it wouldn't stop us. We would scale our productions accordingly. So these are numbers which are very, very loose and really an expression of interest, and the projected annual performance days you see as 124 for that mid-sized theater. There's a lot of overlap between and among these sizes, with the exception possibly of the large theater. What have we found out? Favorable market from all of our secondary data. We found a strong consensus around need in the leadership community and in the arts community, and interest among the arts community and the leadership. We found a great deal of support for this location as city center, with the caveats and things that I've suggested. We also found, I think, really our own impression is a need, what I'll call a need to build the capacity of the arts in this community. If, as, and when a project of a performing arts center were to go forward, a clear investment, as places like Rancho Cucamonga and Mountain View and Thousand Oaks have shown us, a clear investment and partnership with the private sector is important from the very outset. And your arts scene here is emerging. The private sector support in your community and indeed in the county and throughout the state is challenged, is not certainly up to what many other, particularly Midwestern and Eastern communities have done. So there's a lot of cultivation, a lot of capacity building. Our recommendation is supportive of what we're calling reserving a place for a large performing arts venue. The Langford plan we've reviewed. There's about about 70,000 square foot footprint on that plan, which in our report you'll see is really an adequate footprint for a large performing arts center.
So we said adequate.
Is adequate. Is adequate. Yes. It's not grand. It would require additional parking. I mean, we're not technical programmers or architects, but to accommodate a performing arts venue, that'd be a couple thousand seats.
2,100.
2,100, but around, okay.
So no questions in our mind in terms of our experience that it is an adequate site. We think you may want to revisit the idea of the council chambers as a community performance venue and have a look at the design and programming for that along the lines of the Share in Thousand Oaks is a reasonable, relatively low cost. We don't know how much, and it's going to depend on how much is done there, way to get into this marketplace to build this capacity. And we think, lastly, that if the city does go forward with this, and I know the times are challenging and it's very hard for us to make these kind of recommendations in this time, but an investment in the cultural arts. You have made an investment in things like your public art program, and I think that coupled with that, you can look at getting more involved in programming, perhaps bringing in your neighboring cities and the West Valley Arts Council to really serve this market and consider perhaps grants to arts organizations or to artists or through to artists, and foster and help the fundraising situation in this community. You did bring up the question of the prior project at the joint project with the community college, which we did look at, and indeed I was involved in the very early days of the planning of that. And indeed, I was very hopeful that would be a useful, a partnership which would evolve and develop, which it did not. And not having done due diligence on that, I don't know whether it's resurrectable or not. I suspect not. But there is an opportunity for a partnership for the city at the city center site. I would say that would be an opening. I hope I've answered your questions. I certainly would welcome your comments and complaints, if any.
Thank you. Can I ask, right now, anyone in the public like to comment? Okay, Brenda, 3 minutes, please, if you could.
I just wanted to congratulate you on your support and vision for our community's branding, for our future. I did want to perhaps address a couple quick questions that you had about financial, economic prosperity, the economic impact. Excellent, thank you. I love microphones. So a few quick notes. The typical attendee to a nonprofit arts event spends $27.79 per person per event, excluding admission. So if we do the quick math with your example about Child's Play, 350 seats for that one performance, $27, $9,726.50 would be pumped back into our local economy, and we could all do the math about local tax benefits as well for that one performance of Child's Play. So while Goodyear continues to compete and attract, retain businesses, I think it's important to note also that a 2002 NEA study showed that more Americans attended a live arts event than attended a sporting event. So just another quick number, and would just wanted to let you know the Arts and Culture Commission was happy to participate as one of the stakeholders, and we would be happy to also provide more detail about some of that economic impact and be involved in finding some additional support for what the economic impact would be here in Goodyear. So, thanks.
For the record, we should say that Brenda's the chairman of the Goodyear Arts and Culture Commission.
Thank you.
Julie Richards.
Thank you. Hi, Bob. Good job. I talked for quite a long time with Bob about this when they were going through the study, and I just want to say that I support this very much. I think this is a great plan. I would really like to see you consider going back with the idea of the joint use with the council chambers and a performing arts facility. I think that that's a fantastic idea, and it would be a really great way to kind of ease our way into this project. It would allow us time to develop resident companies. I know that there are many, there's a lot of interest in developing local theater companies and that type of thing. However, there's no place for any of these guys to perform. So we have to have something in order for those to be able to develop, because the bottom line is that the schools and the venues that do exist are very, very difficult to get into. The scheduling just isn't practical for us to be able to use these. And I definitely support the investment in cultural development. This is, what we're all about now. We are absolutely trying to build up the capacity of the arts in the West Valley. And I think if we could work together and do that even more so than what we're already doing, I think it would be a great way to get some of the monies that are needed to invest in these projects. And I love the idea that you did identify some cities that did not have any cultural infrastructure before these were built, because that was one of the things that I had asked them to do. And it can happen. I think that this is a possibility. And to address your question, Dick, about the failure of our project, it had to do with fundraising failure. It wasn't about the failure of the building. So,
Well, we can't get into finances. Okay?
yeah,
That's just
I know,
me.
we're not there.
That's my concern.
Yeah.
Okay? That's the reason that project failed, because we couldn't get, excuse the expression, money into the system, okay, or into the project. So
But the city has the ability to bond, and we didn't.
This is my concern.
Big difference,
Let me say this, Julie. I am for this project. okay?
Good.
But not in the current financial state that this nation happens to be in. And according to the president this morning, that if Congress doesn't accept this bill that's in the Senate right now, it's not going to be 2 or 3 years before we come out of this. It could be infinitum.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what concerns me.
It's a difficult
It's
time.
the money.
One of the things when we're in a down economic time, one of the other really important things to do is to plan. And this is a great time to plan for this. This doesn't have to happen tomorrow or next year, but it'd be great if we could at least get this in the planning stage so that when we do start coming out of it, we're ready and we can get this in the hopper along with everything else. That's why it would be so great to have the council chambers attached to this.
I agree wholeheartedly with what you said.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask Julie a question?
Sure.
What's the status of the fundraising that you did do? Did you return all the money to the donors, or?
We have returned everything that everyone asked to be returned. The way that we stated it to our donors is we gave them several options, and this goes back a couple years now. So we do have a small pool of money left, but our board has decided that we are not investing in a building. We don't want to own a building. We want to be a cultural developer. So we are using that money. We've actually transferred it into quasi-endowment that will generate money, hopefully when interest rates go up again, so that we'll be able to provide those infrastructure grants to build cultural development and build the infrastructure of the arts and the capacity of the arts in the West Valley. That's what the Campaign for the Arts is about. We're launching a workplace giving campaign this spring, and hopefully as well position ourselves so that when the economy does turn, we will launch an endowment campaign that will help with that fund as well. So we want to be able to provide significant operating support to the organizations that currently exist and also provide development money so that we can give money to that resident theater company that might want to develop here or that resident dance company that might want to develop here regionally. And this would be a great place for them to jump off.
When you're bringing in a performer or performance group, are you paying market price?
Yes,
for
we
your
are.
facilities?
That is.
And how are you doing with your audiences? Are you breaking even on those performances?
Believe it or not,
Sorry to ask you this publicly, but it helps with this discussion.
the 2 performances that we've done so far this year have been sold out. Now, the performance that's coming up in 2 weeks, not the same story. And we think it has to do with the fact that the first 2 groups that we brought in so far this year were names. They were names. And the next one that's coming in is not as well known. And I think in this economy, that's what it's all about, unfortunately. So that's why. It's absolutely a function of popularity.
But you see that organizations like yourself are willing to pay a market rate for a place to bring that performance in and take that risk as to whether they break even or not. So,
And that's why we have sponsorships and all that kind of good thing, and what the city helps sponsor those things.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, Julie. And Julie is the director of the West Valley Fine Arts Council for the minutes. Further comments from the public? Okay, let's go around the table here. We really have to start making progress on this subject. And do we want it in the CIP, and at what level, and what are the next steps that need to be taken? We're talking about having a retreat in a couple weeks. This would be included in that because it's near part of the city center. That subject was mentioned the other day. So No, you don't want to do it? or-
Oh, no, I'm just, sorry, I'm ad-libbing over here on my calendar. You said we're having a retreat in the
Well,
calendar.
John said we're going to
So,
have one in March.
better get that on the calendar.
My mouth is open too, I had no idea.
Sorry, you distracted
Jim and I just talked about it this morning.
Okay.
And
I got
it'll be in the
distracted.
March timeframe
Okay,
probably.
good.
Sorry, Jim. Apologize.
But it's not going to be a big one, okay? Budget and this, and maybe one or two other quick subjects. Okay, so we got to start moving in this direction, and so let's start, I'd like to hear what each person wants to do. Why don't we start on this end?
You want to start with me? Well, I appreciate the report. Some of the information I feel that we've received from the West Valley Fine Arts Council's study, which you all did, but really letting us know that there's truly, the landscape is positive for a fine arts center. The 2,000-seat auditorium seems like that is a missing entity to the West Valley. My issue, and I know that this is kind of one of those things that maybe it's not going to be self-sufficient, but truly, we want it to be sustainable. And I think that's not a question that I guess you were given to study upon. But, to me, sustainability of this was key. I would love it to be self-sufficient. I know we had agreed, I know you had that it may not be, but
It will not be.
it will not be.
None of them ever are.
Some of the things that have been discussed were different users, and I know that we had decided that a council chambers was not to be part. So what other type of joint use can there be? We need a product that's going to be sustainable, and we don't really necessarily have that answer yet. I was a child that grew up in the Phoenix Little Theater. I took the bus down from 7th Street and Greenway all the way down to Palm Lane and Central through the summers. So this is something that I value, but it's also a luxury, and it's something that we need for creativity, we need for our children, we need for the future of Goodyear, and it is a missing link. So, as the mayor stated, this is a path that we need to go down. The key is, when is going to be the time for it? And I guess somewhere it needs to become in the CIP at some point. And we don't have the site, the acreage. I mean, you stated that the acreage would hold a 2,000-seat performing arts center, but does that include any kind of I don't want to say meeting places, but does that include any kind of classrooms? Does that include anything else with it? I think we're limited now to that size. Or does that include other things? Could it?
It's really a question to be addressed by an architect but the footprint of roughly 70,000 square feet with stacking, I mean, it's a design question, can accommodate a program which would incorporate meeting spaces and
And the site that we have sort of reserved is well over 200,000 square feet. So it's not a problem.
Okay.
Pretty big.
I was just hearing that we really only had enough room for the one.
My understanding, the footprint in the Langford plan is 70,000, but I know there's lots of
That's
other.
the footprint of one of the buildings. Not all three of the buildings, and the site was over 200,000 square feet for Langford.
Well, and then the multi-generational center also could have other areas for things. Okay, I've said enough.
Well, I don't think there were any surprises tonight. As far as the public, I think from the start of the city center, it's a venue that everybody stated they wanted. It certainly has been proven to us that it would help economic development, no question about that, bringing in those companies that we need. We all know that. I mean, that's all fact. I don't like the idea of the council chambers in there. Never have, probably will, never will. I want it separate. I look at how you run business, and I think of the staff, and I think of the transportation, and just think of the economics of how a city hall works and the connection to this building. I just think it's more convenient. I think the cost is better for the city on transportation, getting from one venue to the other, moving materials, you name it. I'm one that believes it should be in the city hall. Now, this is all just wonderful. Now we have to figure out when and how we pay for it. And I guess that's the bottom line. So I was a little bit disappointed, too, about the sustainability. I thought there would be more on the economic sustainability, but it has been, we have been reviewed on that over and over by different venues before. So we know that we're going to have to pay the bills, and there's always going to be bills to pay, and bills that will go unpaid for a while. So that's never been a question. I think from the time that we visited, Frank, you and I went to Las Vegas to that event. Every seminar I attended said, yes, you will be in debt. You will always be in debt. You'll have huge operation and maintenance for it. So we already know that. If we do this, we know that. So timing is everything. And unless you know there's a box somewhere you can open up and find the funds right now, I know we still have bonding ability, but just have to pay the debt service on that, and I don't think we have that. So, yeah, I mean, as much as people have thought I was against this, I'm not against this, never have been against this. It's all had to do with timing.
Well, I admit that I've been against the project down through the years, but, you know, this presentation this evening enlightens me quite a bit. As far as putting in a CIP project, you know, we've done a lot of projects that we put on hold recently, and whether or not we, you know, the CIP program can handle this is another question that we're going to have to answer.
Yeah, like the Police and Fire Administration building. Like the Police and Fire Administration building.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, that's
Exactly. Exactly.
That little one on the side there.
The chief is smiling back there and shaking his head.
Just that small project we haven't done yet?
That's right, exactly. And I would ask that staff and the city manager take this program that we talked about this evening and hold it for future councils so that we don't have to go through the same thing. Because there's good information in here that future councils can use. And I think that this project is going to be not only for this council, but future councils as well. Because it's a very expensive project. And it's one that, you know, that has cultural ability for the community, and it should be considered by not only this council, but other councils that are going to be sitting in these chairs. So, yeah, I'm for it, but provide it. Okay, thank you.
How many seats are in our planned council chambers for the city hall?
About 185. Are we at that level right now?
I think we were shooting for somewhere between 2 and 250. We're a little more than the, yeah, but under 300.
Under 300 is what
Yes.
we're planning
What's this for?
for our current city council chambers that we're planning for City Hall. This sits 100.
That's 100. You know, with the malls open, it's, I think, a potential of 175, a potential in here.
And is this Forum Theater at Thousand Oaks, is that the joint facility?
Yeah, it is, if I'm not mistaken, 400 and something.
Well, I'm looking at your notes, you said 394. But that Forum Theater is what's used Tuesdays and Thursdays as councils. And I'll tell you, I was not supportive in the past of a joint facility. And the reasons I was not supportive is because I felt like we were being backdoored by a private sector partner that just wanted business on the city's dime. And so I wasn't supportive of the past RFP process because of that. I wouldn't necessarily be adverse to switching gears a little bit on that if I could learn more about what that means from Thousand Oaks. I mean, we've got an opportunity that we're going to build a facility and we're going to put 200 to 300 people, let's just say, underneath roof. That's going to be dark 60, 70% of the time unless we do program it. And if there are add-on costs to make it an amenable facility during certain times of the week to be an incubator with that purpose in mind, I wouldn't necessarily be adverse to us doing that if we could show how it was going to work. What I'm not supportive of is another RFP process at this juncture for an unproven concept without knowing what the ticket price is going to be going in the door and what that marketplace is going to be able to bear. I respect the work that was done this evening, and I see that we have a market of 150,000 people, and I do see some similarities, say, between Mountain View and Thousand Oaks and some of these places and where they were at in 1994 and 91 and where we're at today and where we'll be 15, 20 years from now. So I do see some similarities in that. I guess for me, it's, I don't know that I'll ever be supportive of a 2,000-seat theater until I figure out what that dollar amount is and what's it going to cost to go to a venue. I mean, a market study is this part of the market is important to understand, but it's just as important for me on the business side to understand what profit that facility is going to make or what deficit we're going to have to make up. There's no doubt that an arts facility is important to a community, but we've got to understand the deficit that we're going to have to run on that facility and budget for it, and we got to give that thought 20, 30, 40 years out on what that's going to mean. And so we can have lofty goals and talk about the fact that it's wonderful and we might be able to get a symphony in there and stuff, but the reality is what it is in terms of the fact that there's no data to support that yet. Until I see that data, I'm not going to be comfortable. But I wouldn't necessarily object if there was the ability at least to take a peripheral kind of view at our facility, withstanding that we've got the priority in a certain amount, and perhaps there's perhaps Matt gets his pencil to paper and looks for some grants to make it a joint use facility. Maybe that would help with some
We would wait
our
and
stuff. I don't know.
build a city hall.
I'm
and
not talking about slowing
renting
down.
a place like this.
No,
I would
don't
say-
want to slow down City Hall, but
You will, Rob,
You
if we
will.
follow your
There's no way to do it.
We have taken your, to this point, suggestions that it not be in City Hall. To change it at this point in time, you just heard from Langford where they are in the planning process, is
It
unrealistic.
really is. It really is. It's like going backwards. If we're really interested in this performing arts, then what we need to do is what the mayor says, get a study group, get it on the CIP, decide when you're going to do it. There are all sorts
you've
of
got to
things
prove-
in a performing arts if they allow the arts themselves to develop within that building. I'm talking about ballet lessons. I don't know how you do it.
That's
but
why I said, what's the other
you
joint
could
use?
develop this into a learning institution as well as a performing arts. So there are other things within the arts, and keep the administration and the government out of that building. And I think you could be very creative in what you did. It doesn't say that we have to do what other performing arts buildings have in them. We can do some really unusual things, and that's what we're going to have to do in order to sustain it. But to stop the city hall at this
no,
point,
sorry,
all
that was
the
going
money
to be my follow-up question was what
the
would
money
that
we
do?
put into
Okay.
it and all the progress we've gone, we're just going to put that on the side and spend some more money and more time and more rent. So that's I have objections to that. I really do.
If it would significantly delay, I don't necessarily want to see doing that. But if there's opportunities for us to use the facility, okay, so we don't reprogram the whole thing. But I guess for me, you got to take this to the next level to convince me. I'm willing to reserve that plot of land, but I'm not willing to go through the RFQ process like we did 6 months ago, 7 months ago again, and rehash that whole thing.
I think the whole economy
So-
has changed things to this point where today, no, we can't move forward.
No, we can reserve
we
a
can-
plot of dirt and
Exactly.
leave it at that and come back and revisit this on an annual basis and say, is it time to figure out what that market will bear, or is it time, do we have that critical mass?
And the other thing I think
serve
we
it.
need to look at, I really think we need to look at, and this is going to, everybody's going to throw tomatoes at me in a minute here.
Just threw some at me.
Yeah, I do.
No, I'm just kidding.
But I think about police and fire administration, I think about public works, and I'm thinking, so we really, it's not just one building now, we just have to,
There's
priorities, and we have to really talk together. What's the most important priority for our city? And that takes a little bit of different formula to look at.
And that's what the mayor and I were talking about this morning, that is going to be the purpose of this work session or advance that we're
Great.
going to be
That would be great.
budget and public facilities planning, which would include this, public safety building, the training facility, the public works facility, and things like that.
That would be great.
Well, if you press me, this isn't in the top 3 priorities for me.
Well,
I mean,
that's what
I
you-
think it's an important
we need to
aspect of our
discuss it,
community, but it's
but-
not in the top 3 right now.
We actually weren't talking as positive until we heard this presentation tonight. So a lot changes once you all come to the table and you start bringing things. So really, we don't know till we get there and discuss all of these factors together.
Rob, is that good?
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, I can't stress it enough. I mean, we've got, I don't want to put the brakes on City Hall. I don't want to derail that activity at all, so I'll back off on that. But is this an important aspect of the community? Yes. Are there community partners that need to step up to the table to help potentially on the finance end? Yes. Is this a priority for me right now in the next 3 to 5? I don't know. I honestly can't tell you it is.
I don't think we can offer you an opportunity in the next 3 to 5. It isn't there.
That makes sense.
Isn't there?
Some
Okay.
people on this council talk about like.
Could I have
That's right.
a few
Build it
minutes?
now.
Yeah,
I mean,
now it's your turn, Frank.
is it my turn?
Yeah,
I
we're not
can
going
have.
to be surprised.
Everybody's had a chance.
Yeah, I know, but you'll cut me off.
Don't surprise us.
They got
Frank.
most of the time, and you cut me off before I get through.
We'll try to do that.
The idea that what I see here is funding is something we have to put on the back burner because we're not there yet. We're not even close to that. But what I'm hearing are some things that are very important and some things that are not being said. For instance, I can take one city, and that's Cerritos, California, and you're probably very familiar with that city. Same size as Goodyear. That they have built a 1,500 to 1,600 seat auditorium. They built that in their city center complex. It costs them $2.5 million a year for O&M on that building, and it brings in over $60,000 a year into that community in economic impact. $60 million.
Say that number again.
$60 million a year into that community. So that's just an example, and that's just one of them. And then this idea that you brought up on Cadillac versus Chevy, that was the problem with Mesa and some of these other cities that built these gigantic, enormous plants that were Cadillacs, and they should have been looking at Chevy. So don't confuse those things with what we want to do. We want to build something that's going to be workable for this community. And to have the size of that, yeah, we have to study the size of what your performing arts center will be. And you'll need more than one size. So all of these things have to be a consideration. And we have the room to put all of this in there. As far as funds go, that's in the future. There are many things that can be done, and besides part of that CIP, I was on the original CIP committee, and part of the CIP is for a performing arts center, so that's already been, that was earmarked years ago. But as far as putting that together and what size auditoriums you need, you have to decide what you're going to bring in. For instance, you want some top-rated shows that are on the road, unless you have seating capacity of over 1,600 to 2,000, they won't come in. And of course, the optimal is around 1,700 to 2,000 seat auditorium. And then your community theater, of course, as Julie pointed out there, these venues have to be there, or you won't have these kinds of programs. I was president of the West Valley Symphony Board of Directors, and we lost the West Valley Symphony for a while because we lost the Sun Dome, and they attach a place with that organization. So if you have a ballet company, or if you have a children's group, or if you have a theater group of any kind, you must have a venue for it, and it must be appropriate for that, or you'll lose it. It won't be successful. So these are things we must keep in mind when we come to that point. And as far as funding it, the capital funding of a performing arts center is not as difficult as some people may think it is. There is, yes, there's the CIP, and there is the bonding issue that we can use, and it's very important because it's what it does to the community. Second to that, there's also funds out there. There are many arts organizations that have capital funds available, and of course you have to have matching funds for them and so forth and so on. But I've studied what some of those are. They're federal, and so there's a few in the state even. So we want to keep all these things in mind so that it all comes together. It's not going to be a burden that we're going to throw the whole economic burden of this right on our shoulders of the city. We can get some help with this. So I just want to say, keep those kinds of things in mind. Cooperation with the communities and cooperation with the different organizations will bring this to us. So that's all I want to say.
All right, thank you. Just a quick question for my information. I noticed that Sarah Brightman, who's one of the finest voices on the planet in my mind, went to a hockey arena to sing. A lot of people went to that hockey arena to see her. What does a 2,000-person amphitheater, or not amphitheater, but concert hall, what does that provide as far as quality talent? Does a Sarah Brightman come to a 2,000-seat theater?
Yes.
Absolutely, if you pay the price. Cerritos opened with Frank Sinatra, and it's 1,800 seats.
Is it 1,800 seats?
So we can have first-rate talent at a 2,000-seat theater.
Absolutely, if you pay all the artist is interested in, all the artist managers is what their guarantee is at the end of the day. And if you're willing to pay Sarah Brightman $175,000 for a night's performance, she'd be more than happy to come. And in fact, much more happy to come to this venue than the hockey.
Yeah, I would think so. The acoustics are
Well, but that gets to the ticket
should be
price.
dramatically better. But I just wanted to get a feel for that. In other words, 2,000 does have the capability. You can. Sorry, it's my wife. I'm a sick guy. Sorry, Linda. I'll talk to you later. She's worried about me. That's all.
She's watching at home. She timed that impeccably.
She wants Andrea Bocelli.
Yeah,
That's what.
She doesn't want him, huh?
And Bocelli did the same thing. He sang at the hockey arena. Okay, so I just needed that for my own information. So 2,000
Can I add
seats.
something to that, Jim?
No, let me finish, Frank. Let me finish. Okay, and because we got to move on. But okay, I needed to know that, and now I know we can bring first class. Okay, the price is a different story. We don't really understand the costs. I'm not against combining a council chambers and a performing arts. It may be too late to do that. It's too bad if it is, probably, because that satisfies that small venue very nicely, I think. Of course, you can build a concert hall that satisfies a small venue and a large venue. So that needs to be. Just information, we do need to collaborate with the schools. We do need to collaborate with West Valley Fine Arts. And that, I've talked to them for years, and there hasn't been an openness to join the city of Goodyear in a facility. And that needs, we need to come together on that, and we have not been able to do that. But I think that this is absolutely essential if we're going to be a first-class city, if we're going to be respected throughout the valley, in fact, throughout the nation. We're doing things that no other city's doing in the entire nation. So I think we need to step forward in this area, too. And we can always determine later, during the CIP process, what's this going to cost, and make a decision as to when, in fact, that should be placed in the CIP. But I think we should be looking at it to be placed in the 5 to 10 year, at the 5 if possible. And we need to be looking at it now, and if it's too expensive, we move it out. But to me, this is an essential aspect of our maturity as a city, and it's the cultural aspect. I like the Cadillac versus the Chevy. I think we should be first-class acoustics. We should be a place that everybody wants to perform at because it's the very best. And I know you don't agree, but I'm going to fight on this one. I believe this is the right thing for the people of Goodyear, and we can't afford it now, but there are things on our plate which are not necessarily more important than this. So that's where we need to be. And I think that what I call retreat might help us get through that process. But it's this body of 7 folks that makes a policy, so we got to make sure we do that. Okay, anything else? Frank, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
No,
All right.
it's okay, forget it.
All right.
We'll wait till our retreat.
Okay, then I'm going to close this meeting, I guess. And we go immediately, in. How about a 10-minute break?
We have a break. just
10-minute
to-
break?
Yeah.
How about on that clock, we'll go to 22, is that okay?
Sounds
This
good.
meeting's terminated.